Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how globalization makes 99.7% of the Western population worse off, and makes one in every 300 or so better off. But also covering my own journey, because I'm a classic individual that should support and be part of the globalization framework, and yet it's turned out to be the opposite. So I was talking recently to, excuse me, I'm going to cough again. I was having this strong coffee in the morning. So I was talking recently to someone who I've known for a while, and whereas I wouldn't say we're buddies, we sort of have a great deal in common, intellectually and morally, I suppose. But he was saying, we were talking about globalization. He was saying, well, you should be a globalist. You've got, you tick every box, or pretty much every box, for being a globalist, except I don't have a $20 million waterfront harbour mansion or something. But he was, the careers I've had, the work I've done, super well traveled, all that sort of thing. He said, well, you're claiming, you can drive around Silicon Valley without any, geolocation software, without a map or something, and you can go to all these places in the world, and you know them like the back of your hand. And he said that makes you, that gives you the full architecture to be a globalist, and therefore should support it. And of course I don't. And he found that sort of strange. And we haven't had a discussion this sort of frank and open before, but he can't work out why someone who's got all the pretty much all the globalization credentials is not a globalist. That seemed to just mind fuck him. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about that. The reason I don't support, and never really supported, globalization as the ideology is presented today, at least, is that it doesn't work. And like anything that doesn't work and doesn't deliver, or requires, mass lying and trickery and treachery to get it implemented, then it's of no value. It has to be something that works well and it delivers. There has to be general consensus, whether through the ballot box or whatever. But there has to be general consensus that it has to be saleable. You have to be able to go to the public and say, well, this is why it's a good idea. This is why your lives will be made better. This is how we will improve things. And therefore, this is why we're proposing it. We haven't got that situation at all. The reverse is the case. Everyone's lives are getting far worse. Purchasing power is going through the floor, and quality of life, standard of living is just totally up the shit. And yet anyone complains about it, you're a racist, Nazi, fascist, far right, Hitler, and so on. So it's unsaleable as a program. Globalization is unsaleable. But just going through sort of my journey on this, and how I came out to be. I used to live a life. I mean, I don't do the same amount of travel today, but I used to live a life where I was in London on Monday and Hong Kong on Wednesday, and fucking Tokyo on Thursday, and Saturday Los Angeles, and Tuesday the next week New York, and then Friday in Dallas, and all over the place. And it was pretty frantic stuff. And certainly as a young guy, I didn't get a whole lot of time to myself. They work you pretty hard. As I got a bit more senior, I could arrange to I had far more discretion about how long I'd stop somewhere, and that type of thing. And I went to Philadelphia quite a few times before I managed to arrange a weekend where I could go and inspect the Liberty Bell and look at that meeting where the founding fathers of the US met in that building in Philadelphia. Very eerie sensation going to that room, by the way. They claim that the furniture that's in there is the same furniture they used. I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, coming to and I got into this at a very young age, just unusually young age. Shouldn't really have happened. the company I was working for wanted to have a look at the new emerging technologies in the United States, and Silicon Valley, of course, was the place to go. That was the epicenter of new technology. So they, I'll slim this down a bit to make a shorter story of it, but they, the idea was you had to go around those little new industrial estates, or light industrial estates, high tech estates around that Silicon Valley, which started really in the southern tip of the San Francisco city, going down to like San Jose and through there, and there was a lot of little offices and little sort of places where you could just knock on doors, and there'd be someone in there inventing or trying to invent some new kick-ass future technology. There's also a few spots around LA, around Costa Mesa, which is not far from Disneyland, and around that part of town in Orange County. So it had to be something to go around knocking all. A lot of shoe leather, a lot of non-prestigious work. You had to knock on the door and say, hey, I'm Billy Bob from Australia, and what are you guys doing? I've been sent to suss out the new technologies that are. And I don't recall being told to fuck off anywhere. Wherever I went, and the accent was probably exciting for them, but there were people sort of really my own age or close to it, and they were sitting in their often in bare offices, really, with just a desk and a computer or so, and they were inventing the new in those days, the new printed circuit board, or some new chips, or some new software, or whatever, firmware, and all that sort of thing. They were doing that, and there were just hundreds of them all over the place. It was a very exciting time, the inventing of the future. And a lot of the big multinationals had sort of small little divisions that were doing this. So I got, one of them was Xerox as an example, in where was that? El Segundo. That's not far from LA International Airport, and they had like a little spin-off sort of section that was inventing the future, and very exciting times, and it was like you're walking into part of history, and there was a certain wow factor about it. But anyway, the knocking on all these doors, and the guys in the office, and none of the senior guys who would normally have grabbed an international journey for themselves, the glory and prestige and so on of traveling internationally was quite high at the time, so they normally would have grabbed that, but they looked at it and thought, no, this is too much like hard work, I don't want to do that. Now there was a couple of guys who were ahead of me in the those who of like lower level management and so on. But one guy had a very domineering wife who told him he wasn't allowed to travel, and another guy, so something happened, he got sick or something or other. So that left me as the only guy. And they didn't really want to send me because I was too young, which I was, by the way. I was too young. How old was I at the time? 22, 23, something like that. They didn't really want to send me because I was too young, but they, it came up, we were in a meeting, someone came up and said, well, Spanish is quite widely spoken around there, and so not as much as it is today in that part of California, but and I spoke some Spanish, not to academic level, but not to tertiary level, but it was passable enough to get by, and so that sealed it. But so when I said, well, I actually speak some Spanish, and so I threw out a couple of sentences, and they go, bingo, okay, it's you. And just to sort of, I don't know, punish me for my youth, they prescribed all the cheapest hotels and the cheapest rental vehicles and the cheapest flights. I remember the flight to get to US sort of had about 99 million stops. It stopped fucking everywhere between Australia, went to New Zealand, and then it went to various islands, and Fiji and Tahiti, and here, there, everywhere, Hawaii. It took 10 years to get there, but that was it was like the backhanded punishment for my youth, I think, at the time. But anyway, so I started off that began a process where I sort of was absorbed into, if you like, international travel and international business. So I travelled all, before I was 30. Well, by the time I was in my early 30s, I travelled the world several times over and gone to all these sort of locations, and so this gave me an insight into a lot of things I otherwise wouldn't have had. And the beginnings of globalization was something that I saw, not fully aware that this is what it was, a new ideology that was being imposed upon us, but I could see it taking shape. Particularly with hindsight, it was obvious if only I'd maybe thought about it a bit more deeply. And part of the thing was reading all the international newspapers, particularly where you get multiple newspapers in one 24-hour cycle, and you'd start to see the pattern of propaganda throughout the newspapers. This was something that particularly I saw and caused me quite a bit of concern. What's going on here? Why are these newspapers telling so many lies? Why are they making claims that are clearly untrue? Why is it not being challenged by the body? Why is it being supported by the body politic? So all these questions were already coming into my mind, and traveling first class, which as I got a bit older, I was able to, and given I was such a frequent flyer, the airlines would often upgrade me to first class. So I got to meet a lot of people I otherwise, just in the day-to-day course of things, wouldn't have met. And but politicians, advisors, former politicians, all sorts of people. For example, and I've mentioned this before, I met a guy who was from one of the Caribbean islands. I'm not sure I remember which one, but one of the Caribbean islands, and he was part of a team to do trade negotiation with the US government, and he'd come from Washington or New York, wherever it was, where they'd had the meetings. And he was on the plane as it was going via, I think it was going via Florida or Texas or something like that. So and I ended up sitting next to him, and he was still quite bewildered. He wasn't a smart guy. He was just well connected to one of the ruling families in this Caribbean island. But he's the son of like the head goon or something. But he went to this trade negotiation meeting or trade discussion meeting, assuming they would talk about trade. So he said he was there ready to talk about sugar and this, that, and the next thing, and exporting sugar to the US for a price, because it was some of these Caribbean islands are quite poor, and he said all they wanted to talk about was putting up divorce courts and making sure men were forced to pay child support and alimony and all sorts of things like that. Or he said it was all social engineering stuff and the American government was saying you need to do all these, you better do all these social engineering things or you're screwed. We won't give you access to our market or our trade or anything. So it was all social engineering. He's quite bewildered by this. He said, well, why would they care? We went to a trade meeting and all they wanted to talk about was social engineering. And so these sorts of things in a cumulative sense, because I came across them, that and things like it quite often. And, talking to a guy who was an advisor to Pierre Trudeau, and the list goes on of people that the Canadian Prime Minister, the alleged father of Justin Trudeau. And so going through all this, these were all the people that I met. So I was able to have a bird's eye or a snapshot, or in some cases quite a detailed view of the developing momentum around the globalization ideology. It didn't all happen in a single pass. It sort of moved forward as an ideology and had increments added and so on. And I noticed Ronald Reagan, the president, gave an amnesty to millions of Mexican illegals, and I thought, why would you do that? Even as a younger man, and I would sort of. Now on top of this, you get a lot of time to yourself when if you're on a 12-hour plane flight or a 14-hour plane flight, as the Sydney to LA long haul flight is, or non-stop Sydney, London or something like that, then you get quite a bit of time to yourself. And I tried to put that time into, into reading. So, reading business magazines, newspapers, and various books that I would get. And some of the people I met on the planes would recommend, have you read the book such and such and so and so? So I would go and grab those, and some of them were rubbish, but some of them were quite good. So I was able to expand my body of knowledge. But I came to the conclusion at a reasonably early age, I think by the time I got to my early 30s, if not a bit younger, I'd come to the view that this globalization thing, which I hadn't perceived fully as globalization, it relied on mass lying. It relied on mass lying. Now, being a bit of a history buff, I saw how communism and so on also relied on mass lying and spreading mass panic over developing phantoms, enemies of the people, far right, revolutionaries and fascists and so on. So I saw all that and realized that globalization was something that it was unsaleable. It wasn't going to deliver a benefit ever, and this was being concealed from the people. I was also, excuse me, concerned about the amount of Western white politicians that were prepared to sell out their people and their country and their fellow citizens. And also the developing disdain for the Western electorate who had acquired the vote in different times and over different issues, where if you stopped the average voter in the street and said, well, who's the prime minister, or who's the president, or who's the vice president, or this or that, some pretty sort of basic questions where it wasn't really deep and dark sort of political theory or something. They just didn't know. And so there was certainly an argument, you'd say, for reducing or limiting the amount of people who could vote. But if you then say to people, well, you can't have the vote, but you have to lay your life down in the armed forces, or then I don't agree with that. I think if you're going to be asked to lay down your life, then you should have the fucking vote. But nonetheless, it was obvious to me how completely unworkable the globalization project was. And this was in the earlier iterations of it, where it wasn't as clear and stark as it is today. And also in the United States, the growing attempt to divide society along race and gender lines, gender sort of being the first one they reached for, and just seeing how much dishonesty and lies and trickery and deceptions there were around that. Now, if the only way you can get your program out there is to tell that many lies and engage in that much deceit, shut down any alternative points of view or positions or opinions, then you're trying to push something that is unworkable. It's bullshit, and in the same way that communism was in the Soviet Union and so on. So this became. So I disagree with globalization, not on ideological lines that I was for or against the ideology or anything like that, but it's not working if you have to tell that many lies to try and con people into accepting it. If you have to engage in that level of deceit and so many untruths and treacheries and trickeries, then you've got nothing. It doesn't fucking work. Now, there's also the practical angle that the further globalization moves along, the lower the Western standard of living becomes. So, again, we've spoken about this before, that a factory worker in 1970 pretty much all across the West, a factory worker could afford to support a dependent wife and 2.4 children in a basic house with a basic car and a driving vacation once a year or something, and kids could go to school, and that was possible on a factory man's salary in 1970. Today, it would take 4 salaries of a factory worker to be able to afford that standard of living. So our standard of living has gone into the toilet, and this has occurred within a 50-year time span, which isn't a whole lot in the overall scheme of things, but it's come not from natural organic increases in cost of living. Far from it. We're talking about premeditated transfers of wealth away from the white Western middle class, particularly to an elite class, and then further theft of Western white middle class wealth as it's given in social services to illegal migrants and illiterate peasant migrants and so on. So I'm against globalizing because it doesn't fucking work. If it's so good, then you can sell it. Then you can say, well, this is why it's better. This is why it's better than went before. But they can't and don't and won't do it because they're unable to point out how it's better, because it's not. It's a great deal worse than what went before. And on that basis alone, like a broken piece of machinery or something that you buy in the shop that doesn't work in anywhere close to the way that the brochure says it should, then I'm against it only for those reasons, which is purely practical, realistic and mechanical. You've been with Tacitus Today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.